Good evening, traveler. Tonight we walk not down the grand corridors of kings and queens, nor through the echoing halls of mighty cathedrals. Instead, we drift gently, slowly, into the forgotten corners of the Middle Ages, into stone cottages with crooked walls, into village chapels no longer remembered, and into a world where the candlelight dimmed, but never quite went out. This is not a story of terror. It is a story of dust, of whispers, of cold stone floors and long forgotten prayers. It is a story of a ghost, one that doesn't scream but waits and watches as the flame in your candle draws lower and lower still. So pull your blanket closer, let the wind rattle the shutters, and drift gently into the flickering quiet of the medieval ghost and the dimming candle. Part 1, The Last Candle of Elder Hollow. In a forgotten corner of the English countryside, so far from any castle, any lord, or even a proper road, there was a place called Elder Hollow. Elder Hollow was not marked on maps, for it had never mattered enough to be remembered. No wars had been fought there, no treasures buried. It was a village of crooked roofs, mossy stones, and a chapel that leaned to the left, just slightly, as if sighing from centuries of damp winters. The villagers were quiet folk. They believed in hard work, in simple bread, and in things best left unspoken. At dusk, they would light their candles, not lanterns, not oil lamps, just plain wax candles. Always one per room, no more. Because in Elder Hollow, it was said, if more than one candle flickered in a room after nightfall, it might draw her. They never said her name, only her. And if a child asked, the answer was always the same: don't worry about that. Just watch your candle. No one had seen her in years, decades perhaps, but the rules were never broken. There was one man, however, old Ferris, the candlemaker, who lived just on the edge of the village. His cottage smelled of beeswax and smoke, and his windows were always fogged over from the warmth inside. He was kind and quiet, never married. People said he talked to his candles, but that was fine. Everyone had their ways. What the villagers didn't know was that Ferris had been keeping a secret. One candle in his cottage was never blown out. It burned day and night, with no reason given, tucked away on the back wall of a tiny cellar beneath his home. It was short now, almost gone, and when it finally went out, she would know. Part 2, Whispers Beneath the Floorboards. The cellar beneath Ferris's home was not wide. It was barely taller than a man, and the air within always felt 2 days older than the world above it. Damp crept along the stones, and thin roots hung like brittle threads from the low ceiling. The candle sat on a stone shelf, alone, its wax pooled and crusted at the base like a pale, frozen waterfall. Ferris came down every morning, just after sunrise and again just before dusk. He never spoke to the candle. Not anymore. He simply checked the flame, made sure it still lived. The wick was short now, so short. The flame flickered with uncertainty, like a breath caught between worlds. Once, long ago, he'd tried to replace it, to light another candle in its place, but the new one had refused to burn, not even a spark. He remembered how the room had gone cold that day, unnaturally cold, and he remembered the whisper, a voice that came from nowhere, yet pressed against both ears. Not that one. He never tried again. Outside, Elder Hollow moved slowly as always. Chickens clucked, water sloshed from buckets. The old wooden chapel bell rang, though no one remembered who had rung it, and the fog never quite left. But in the cellar, Ferris's hands trembled. That night, for the first time in many years, the candle's flame leaned low, almost gone, and with it, something stirred. He heard it before he saw it. Not footsteps, no, just the groan of timber, the faintest creak, like weight pressing on ancient floorboards. But Ferris was alone. He'd locked the hatch, twice. Still, the sound came again. Creak! It moved slowly, above his head, across the planks of his home, room to room. The candle danced in its plate, the flame shrank, and then silence. He waited. One breath, two. Then, the floor above let out a single sharp knock. Just one, as if something had placed a hand against the floor, and tapped. Ferris stood frozen. The air had turned thick, like honey laced with ash. He dared not breathe too loudly. The candle, still flickering, had dimmed to a thread. He whispered, his voice dry and small. Not yet. Not yet. And the knock came again, gentler this time, like a memory that refused to fade. Ferris slowly backed toward the ladder. His knees ached, his back screamed, but he did not dare turn his back to the candle, because if the flame died, she would no longer knock. She would descend. Part 3, a gentle knock and the breath behind it. Morning did come, though it brought no comfort. The mist outside Ferris's cottage had thickened. It no longer drifted gently. It hung, pressed against windows and doors like something trying to get in. The villagers of Elder Hollow noticed, of course. They always noticed. But they never said much, just muttered to each other in passing, short phrases, eyes averted, candles watched carefully. Ferris hadn't slept. He had remained in the cellar until the flame steadied, just a little, sometime near dawn. His joints ached from standing, his ears rang with silence. And yet, he had heard that knock. Twice. He hadn't imagined it. He had felt the floor tremble, ever so slightly, like someone had rested their hand upon it from above, and breathed. There had been no wind, no movement, just the air, thick as wool, and the gentle creak of memory. He climbed back into his house, slow and heavy, avoiding the spot where the knock had sounded. Not out of fear, he told himself, but out of respect. Some things should not be disturbed. In the hearth, a small pile of ash. The fire had died long before he returned upstairs. He didn't bother relighting it. The room was already warm enough, though not from any natural source. Instead, he sat in his old wooden chair, the one with the uneven leg, and listened. To nothing. But sometimes nothing was the loudest sound of all. He could feel it, a weight in the air, a presence with no form, a watcher. She was close, closer than she'd been in years. He remembered, long ago, when the village still whispered her name behind closed doors, when old Marta, the midwife, had insisted she saw the shadow of a woman in her wash basin, when the blacksmith's daughter had sleepwalked into the woods and returned with frostbite in July. Those stories had faded. The children now laughed at them, or ignored them. But Ferris knew better. He was the last of those who remembered, and so he kept the candle. The same candle, the one that still burned, barely, beneath his floor. He tried to distract himself. He trimmed fresh wicks, melted leftover wax. He even spoke aloud, as if to the room, though his words were for the flame below. She's only checking, just checking, that's all. The shadows in the corners stretched longer than they should have. By nightfall, he was back in the cellar. The flame had sunk again, trembling like a heartbeat slowing in deep sleep, and then it happened once more. From above, just like before. Then, tap! Only once. Ferris didn't move. Then, the breath. He heard it, soft, drawn in, as if someone just above the floorboards was listening. To him. Part 4. The sound of thread on stone Ferris didn't speak of the breath. He didn't tell the villagers. There was no one left, really, who would have believed him. Or worse, some might have believed him too much. And so he remained quiet, as always, as the candle did. The knock had not returned, but the air in the house had changed. It wasn't colder, exactly, just heavier. He noticed it when he moved through his kitchen. His boots dragged slightly, as if the floor itself resisted him. The spoon he used to stir wax felt weighted, though it was just wood and iron. Even the curtains seemed to sag more than they used to. There was a stillness in the walls, like a held breath, a waiting. That night, Ferris prepared for his descent once again. He wore the same cloak, coarse wool, brown, mended at the elbow. He carried a small candle to light his way, but he never let its flame near the one below. The two should never meet. As he lifted the trapdoor to the cellar, the hinges groaned, more than usual. A long, reluctant moan that seemed to echo into the ground itself. He whispered a quiet apology. He descended the ladder slowly, careful not to let the candlelight flicker too much. The stone floor greeted him with its familiar chill. The shadows did not move, but they watched. Then he heard it. A sound he hadn't heard in many years. Not a knock, not footsteps. It was softer, like fabric being dragged across stone, a gentle brushing, as if a long sleeve or a tattered hem was being pulled slowly across the cellar floor. Ferris turned, though there was nothing behind him. The candlelight caught only walls, and shelves, and stillness. He returned his gaze to the sacred candle. It was fluttering, almost out. He knelt slowly, letting the warmth of his own breath try to shield the tiny flame. He dared not speak to it, not directly, but he whispered, as if to the room, "Please, just a little longer." The brushing sound stopped, and from somewhere, now impossibly close, he heard a creak. Not above him, not across the room. This time, it was just behind his left ear, a breath, drawn in, as if something were curious. The candle's flame steadied. Ferris didn't move, didn't turn, didn't even blink, because whatever had drawn breath behind him wasn't finished yet. Part 5, The Chapel Bell That No One Rang. The next morning came with no birdsong, only the quiet groan of trees shifting in the windless air, and the far-off toll of the chapel bell, just one note, soft, distant. No one rang that bell anymore, not since old Thomas passed and the bell rope had frayed and snapped. The chapel doors had warped shut, the pews within rotted slowly under a dripping roof. Moss clung to the altar like a waiting hand. Still, the bell rang. Ferris heard it as he stood over his breakfast, porridge untouched, cooling in a cracked bowl. He did not flinch. He only turned slowly and looked out his window. The fog was thicker today, thick enough that the trees looked like shadows leaning in, whispering through the mist. And then he felt it again. The weight, not just on his chest now, but on the house itself, like something enormous had perched on the roof and settled in to stay. He returned to his chair. The candle he kept on the table was new, fresh, tall, but he did not light it. He never lit more than one at a time. Instead, he closed his eyes just for a moment and saw her. Not clearly, never clearly, but he saw the outline. A woman, tall, still, wrapped in robes like flowing ash. Her face, veiled not by cloth but by something darker, like memory, like grief. She did not move, but she watched, always watching. He opened his eyes slowly. The knock didn't come that day, nor the breath, nor the sound of fabric on stone. But something had changed. He felt it in the silence, a new kind of hush, not of peace, but of pause, as if something were gathering. He spent the day moving slowly through his home, tidying for no reason, checking latches and shutters that had no need for checking. He whispered to his tools, apologized to the splintered floorboard he had meant to fix. He avoided the cellar, just for a few hours more, but by dusk he could no longer wait. He lit his way with shaking hands. The stairs creaked beneath him as if they remembered the night before, as if they warned him. The candle below, it had shrunk further, bent low to one side, its light dim, amber, almost gone, and on the wall behind it, something new, a shape not carved, not painted, just darker than the rest of the stone, as if a shadow had fallen there once and decided to stay. It was tall, thin, unmoving. Ferris stared, and though he saw nothing shift, he felt watched, not by memories. Part 6, the shadow that wasn't cast that night. The wind returned, but it didn't howl or whistle. It simply passed, like something brushing through the world, unseen but undeniable. Ferris stood at the threshold of his cellar once more. Above him, the house creaked with unfamiliar rhythm. It wasn't the usual settling of beams and boards. It was deliberate, a rhythm, a pattern, as if someone were pacing across the roof, slowly, barefoot. He opened the trapdoor and descended with care, as always. But tonight the ladder groaned beneath his weight, louder than ever before, each step a whisper of protest. The candle was waiting, still alive, but just barely. Its flame had dwindled to the size of a pin, a faint glow that pulsed every few seconds, like it too was breathing, labored, weak, but persistent. The shadow on the wall had not moved, but it had changed. It was darker now, sharper. No longer an odd patch of discoloration. Now it had form, shoulders, a neckline, a head tilted ever so slightly, as if listening. But what chilled Ferris most was that the flickering flame behind him did not cast the shape. He tested it, moved his hand, his candle, even his own body. The shadow did not respond. It was not his, and yet it remained on the wall, fixed, focused. It did not move, but it was not still. Then from the far corner of the cellar came a sound that turned his stomach cold. The unmistakable scrape of fingernails on stone. Not a scratch, not an attack, just dragging, slow, methodical, as if someone were tracing lines into the wall, writing something no one could read. Ferris turned his head, but he could see nothing beyond the reach of the candle, only shifting darkness. He whispered into the room. "I remember, I haven't forgotten you." The scraping stopped, and then, from the base of the shadow, just where the floor met the wall, a small puddle began to spread. Not water, not wax, just darkness. Like the color had spilled out of the stone itself and couldn't be mopped up. It crept outward, not fast, not slow, just steady, silent. Ferris stepped back. His heel touched the lowest rung of the ladder he did not climb. Instead, he whispered again, "I'll stay, I promised." The candle gave a tiny twitch of light, almost a nod. The puddle of darkness paused, and somewhere above or below or within came the faintest sound of cloth unfurling, like robes being shaken out after a long slumber. The flame did not die, but Ferris knew. She was closer now. Not at the window, not at the door, not on the roof. She was in the room, and she was listening. Part 7, What Waits Between Two Breaths. The air had changed again. It wasn't colder, not exactly, but it was deeper. Every breath Ferris took seemed to echo in his chest, like the air was thicker, heavier, as if it had been pulled from the depths of some forgotten place, a place where people didn't breathe often because they had no need. He sat in the cellar now, not standing, not pacing, just sitting on the bottom step of the ladder, his eyes fixed on the candle's flickering flame and the shadow beside it. The puddle of darkness hadn't grown, but it hadn't dried either. It sat there, slick and silent, as if it were waiting to be stepped in. But Ferris knew better. The moment his foot crossed that line, the rules would change. He didn't know how, but he knew that. The flame quivered. Not from wind, there was no wind here, but something had passed, just at the edge of the room. He didn't see it, he only felt it. Like the breath behind your neck in a dream you can't remember. And then the silence broke, not with a scream, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Not words, but movement, fabric, like a dress brushing the edge of a stone wall, slow, soft, measured. He looked toward the far end of the cellar. There was nothing, only that familiar stone wall, damp and cracked and curling with moss in the corners. But in the dimness, something shimmered. Not light, not shadow, just shimmered, like heat above a candle, but sideways. He didn't move, didn't blink. Even the flame seemed still now, balanced between exhale and inhale. And then it came again. Not a noise, not a knock, just space. Shifting, as if the world had moved ever so slightly to the left, but left him behind. The shimmer thickened, took shape, not fully, not clearly, but enough. He could see the suggestion of someone tall, someone watching, someone who had been very quiet for a very long time. And in that moment, Ferris realized something strange. He was not afraid. He was known, not seen, not judged, but remembered. And in that space, between two breaths, he whispered softly, "You've come early this time." The shimmer paused. The candle's flame leaned toward him, just slightly. And in the back of his mind, like a lullaby from childhood, a thought rose. It doesn't end when the flame goes out. It begins. Part 8, the flame that bent toward her. Ferris did not move. He had grown used to the stillness, to the hush of the cellar, to the ancient smell of wax, stone, and something else, older than memory. The shimmer in the far corner had not left. It lingered, just beyond clarity, a form that refused to fully exist, or perhaps refused to leave. The candle, now a stub barely taller than a thumb, bent slightly in its dish. Its flame leaned, not from breeze, but as if drawn toward her. The shadow on the wall had grown darker still, no longer merely a stain, it had dimension now. Depth. It gave the illusion that it could step forward at any moment, and perhaps it already had. Ferris's voice cracked when he finally spoke. It had been hours or longer. "You were never cruel," he said. It was not a question, not a plea, just truth. No reply came, only the sound of shifting fabric, soft and slow, a brush of presence. The puddle of shadow on the floor had stopped expanding, but it pulsed, not visibly, but felt, like a heartbeat beneath the stone, like breath beneath the earth. He took in a long, trembling inhale. "Do you still remember the night I saw you first?" He smiled, faintly, a sad, worn smile, not from regret, but from the weight of memory. It was behind the chapel when the stars were veiled. The bell rang on its own that night, too. The shimmer stilled, the flame steadied, and Ferris closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to see better. And in that space of closed sight, she came clearer. The veil was not cloth, it was sorrow, thick, tangled, like threads soaked in time and silence. She had no face, only a softness, a shape outlined by absence, and Ferris knew she had been waiting, not to haunt, not to punish, but simply to be known. He opened his eyes again. The cellar remained, as it always had, but the flame, for the first time, bent not just toward her. It danced, just a little, like it recognized the shape of a hand once held, or a name once whispered in the dark. Ferris felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, not from fear, but from remembering too much at once. "You've come early," he repeated, and somewhere in the air between them, soft as candle smoke, came the answer. "You've waited long enough." Part 9. The candle remembers what he forgot. The flame no longer flickered from fear. It flickered from recognition. Ferris sat in silence as the cellar embraced him once more, not with cold, but with memory. Every stone seemed to carry a breath from long ago. Every shadow knew his name and whispered it very gently, as if not to wake something sleeping nearby. The shimmer had faded into stillness again, but it had not gone. She was here now. Not near. Not far. Just present. And the candle, his candle, the one that had burned longer than any other, seemed to know it too. It curved slightly, the flame rising and lowering like a slow heartbeat, a breath held, then released. Over and over. Ferris leaned forward, his joints aching softly in the way that only long memories could cause. He looked at the flame. "Do you remember?" he asked, barely louder than the sound of a spider stepping across stone. "Do you remember when she was alive?" The cellar did not reply, but the candlelight shimmered on the stone walls, casting patterns like the ones painted on the chapel's ceiling before the roof gave in. He remembered her laughter then. Not clearly, just the shape of it. A laugh like warm rain on dry soil. She had stood beside him years ago when his hands were still steady and the wax had never spilled. She had helped him roll the wicks, had kissed his cheek when the candles didn't set right. And now, she returned only in shadow. But even shadows carried echoes. The puddle of darkness on the floor glistened faintly in the dim light. It was not water, it was not ink, it was something heavier. Something that had once been light and had forgotten how. Ferris whispered again. "I'm sorry." For what, he wasn't sure. Maybe for the years he had stopped speaking to her. Maybe for the days he had lit the candle, not out of memory, but routine. Maybe for living too long. The cellar shifted gently as if the stones themselves were exhaling. And then, something changed. The candle brightened, just for a second, bright enough to cast his shadow, and hers, not the dark puddle, not the mark on the wall, but her, the outline, the figure, beside him, not behind, not above, beside. It didn't last, just a flicker, but he saw it. He saw her. And though her face was still veiled in the soft blur of time, he knew she forgave him. Part 10. The night the flame refused to sleep. That night, Ferris did not return upstairs. He remained in the cellar, seated on the step with his knees pulled gently to his chest, wrapped in his old cloak that smelled faintly of wax and wood smoke. The flame before him burned quietly, brighter now, as if it had remembered something worth staying awake for. And the air was warm. Not the warmth of fire nor of comfort, but the warmth of presence. There were no more scraping sounds, no more knocks from the floor above, no more pacing on the roof, just stillness, like the world was holding its breath with him. The puddle of darkness remained, but it had not grown. Its edges had dried into strange curling shapes, like ancient letters forgotten by any known language, and in its center, a soft pulse, as if it too had a heartbeat now. Ferris reached toward the candle, not to touch it, only to feel the warmth from its flame, and he whispered, "You stayed, even when I stopped believing." The shadow beside the candle softened, not disappeared, not faded, relaxed. It was no longer a threat. It had become something else, a memory maybe, or a visitor, or something that had always been there, waiting for him to become still enough to notice. He rested his head against the cellar wall, letting his eyes close, but not to sleep. Sleep felt too final. Instead, he listened, and in the silence, a voice returned. Not loud, not clear, but real. It was not spoken in words, it was spoken in reminders. The creak of the chapel door he once fixed, the song she hummed when kneading dough, the way her hands smelled of rosemary and beeswax, the way she used to say his name only once, but somehow it echoed for hours in his chest. All of it returned, and the candle, his last candle, burned with the steadiness of someone who knows they are being watched by someone who loves them still. Ferris wept, not in sorrow, but in relief. The shimmer in the corner of the cellar had faded completely. Not because she had left, but because she no longer needed to be seen. She was everywhere now, in the walls, in the warmth, in the light. And Ferris, old as the cobblestones above his roof, closed his eyes and whispered, "I am not alone." The flame danced once and did not sleep. Part 11, when the house stopped settling. The village above did not know. Elder Hollow continued its quiet rhythm. Chickens muttered in the dirt, a bucket fell over somewhere in the mist. The trees groaned softly with the kind of patience that only centuries can teach. And the chapel bell, rusted and still, refused to chime again. But below the earth, where the stones remembered names long forgotten, Ferris remained seated. The candle burned on. It should not have. By all logic, the wax should have melted fully hours ago, but it hadn't. It persisted. Not brightly, not boldly, but faithfully. The cellar around him had quieted into a silence so complete it was no longer empty. It was full of breath, of memory, of waiting that had ended. And above him, the house did not creak. It did not shift or groan. It did not settle like old houses do. It simply stopped, as though something that had been restless for too long had finally sat down beside him and found peace. Ferris let his hand rest on the cool stone beside the candle. He did not speak this time. He did not need to. The candle spoke for him. It shimmered gently, a rhythm like a pulse, as if it had become a small living thing. Not just a light, but a companion. He did not see her anymore. No veil, no shimmer in the shadows, no shape leaning in the corner. But he felt her in the stillness, in the quiet joy that had returned to this place, in the soft hum of something deeper than sound. He thought of the first candle he'd ever made. He was only a boy. The wax had been uneven, the wick too thick. It sputtered and went out after only moments. She had laughed back then. She had cupped his hand in hers and said, "You'll make better ones when your hands stop rushing ahead of your heart." Now his hands no longer rushed. They only rested, softly, like the slow folding of a blanket at day's end. The puddle of darkness had faded too. It had dried into the stone, leaving no mark, as if it had never been a threat, but a gate, a place she used to come through. And now, perhaps, a place she no longer needed. The flame rose a little, then dipped. A nod, maybe, or a sigh. Ferris did not sleep, but he closed his eyes again, and when he breathed, he no longer felt alone in his skin. He felt surrounded, not by ghosts, but by something softer. Part 12, Dust That Remembered Her Footsteps. The dust in the cellar had settled long ago. It blanketed the shelves, the beams, the uneven stones beneath Ferris's feet. But tonight, it moved. Not in gusts, not in sudden swirls, just gently, as if someone had walked across the room without lifting their feet, and the dust had simply risen to greet them. Ferris did not open his eyes. He didn't need to. He could feel it. Each grain drifting in the air like a sigh. Each particle a whisper of something long ago. The candle still burned, steady, soft, low. And Ferris, he breathed in with care as if he might disturb something if he exhaled too quickly. He could feel the presence now, not just around him, but through him. She was no longer behind the veil. She was in the wax, in the stone, in the dust itself. The house had stopped breathing, but Ferris had begun again, fuller now, deeper. He let his thoughts drift to the corner cupboard with the missing hinge, to the three-legged stool she never let him throw away, to the night she had gone quiet and the candle by her bedside had burned just like this one, soft, low, steady. He never buried her, not really. The body, yes, but never the rest. He had lit this candle the day after, not out of ritual, not out of fear, but because it felt wrong to leave the dark alone. And now, after so many seasons, so many rains and thaws and falls of snow, she had returned, not to hunt, but to rest. The dust floated in little spirals now, rising and falling with the faint warmth of the flame. And Ferris spoke again, his voice like old wood bending under a soft weight. "I thought I was keeping you here," he smiled, thin and cracked. "But you were the one who stayed, while I forgot how to let go." He opened his eyes at last, and the room was beautiful. Not new. Not clean, but beautiful in the way forgotten places become when someone remembers them fully, without fear or sorrow. The candle had burned so low it was nearly part of the stone now, but the flame still danced, and Ferris, for the first time in many years, allowed himself to lean back, fully. The dust settled again, but in the pattern it left behind on the floor, there were footprints, bare, and hers. Part 13, the sound that wasn't heard, the cellar no longer whispered. Whatever had lingered in the corners, whatever had tiptoed behind the beams, had now grown quiet. Not from fear, not from hiding, but from peace. Ferris sat with his back to the wall, his legs stretched out across the stone floor. His knees didn't ache the way they used to. Or perhaps they did, and he simply no longer minded. The candle had melted low enough that its base had joined the stone. A perfect little lake of wax, golden and still, and the flame, against all rules of fire, had not changed shape for hours. It stood tall and slim and soundless. Outside, the village of Elder Hollow remained lost in its eternal mist. The sun may have risen, or not. Time, like breath, had slowed, and within this quiet, something almost unnoticeable happened. The house above shifted just once. Not a creak, not a groan, but a movement so subtle, so feather-light, that Ferris only felt it through the soles of his feet against the stone. It was as if someone had walked upstairs, crossed from one room to another, and gently closed a door that had been left open for far too long. He didn't startle, he didn't rise, he simply listened, and then smiled, because the sound hadn't been in the room, it had been of the room. The difference mattered. He rested one hand on the floor beside him, feeling the coolness of the stone, how smooth it had grown from years of being touched, swept, cared for. By him, by her, by both. In the dim light, he noticed something else. The wax around the candle had begun to form small ridges like ripples from a drop long fallen. Patterns he hadn't carved, but ones he recognized. The shape of her initials, the edge of her shawl, the tiny swirl she used to draw on the corner of her letters. Not exact, but close enough that memory could do the rest. And Ferris whispered, not to the flame, not to the cellar, but to the air itself. You don't have to stay, not for me. There was no reply, not in words, but the air warmed just slightly, and the candle's light tilted almost imperceptibly toward him, like a final nod, like a goodbye that didn't need to be said aloud. Part 14, the wax that spoke in circles. By now, Ferris had forgotten how long he'd been sitting. It didn't matter. The clock in his cottage had stopped ticking years ago, and the sun hadn't touched Elder Hollow in what felt like weeks or decades. Time in the cellar moved like melted wax, slow, deliberate, silent. The candle still lived. Not in defiance, but in devotion. Its small, upright flame glowed not with urgency, but with understanding. Around its base, the pool of wax had hardened and softened in rhythms Ferris no longer questioned. Patterns formed, then vanished, then formed again. Some resembled loops. Others looked like the rings inside an old tree stump. And still others were shapes that might have once meant something. Letters, perhaps, or music, before language got tired and gave up. Ferris leaned forward, eyes soft with sleep, but not asleep. He traced one spiral with his finger, not touching, just following. It reminded him of the brooch she wore each winter, wrought iron in a curl, shaped like a fern. She used to wear it to chapel, even when no one else went, even when the bell rope had frayed. He smiled at the memory, and the flame rose ever so slightly. A ripple, a response. You remember too, he whispered. He looked at the candle like one looks at an old friend, without expectation, but with comfort. And then, for the first time in days, or was it weeks, he heard something again, not footsteps, not creaks, not her, but a hum, so faint he thought it might be the blood in his ears. But it had a pattern, 3 notes, soft, descending. It was her lullaby, the one she used to hum when the wind howled too loud and the shutters wouldn't stay still. He had forgotten it, until now. The wax beneath the flame shifted again, curling into a gentle wave. The flame pulsed in time with the tune, not exactly music, but something deeper, like the memory of music heard through stone. Ferris closed his eyes and mouthed the notes silently. And the cellar answered, not in voice, but in warmth. The floor beneath him seemed to soften. The stones no longer dug into his spine. The weight in his chest loosened. The air no longer pressed down. It lifted. And somewhere beyond the reach of the candlelight, perhaps at the top of the ladder, or maybe only in his heart, he heard a door open. It didn't creak. Part 15, where silence began to sing. The candle was now more wax than wick. Its flame, once timid and trembling, now stood tall and still. No longer a guardian of fear, but a keeper of peace. It did not flicker in the draftless cellar. It did not reach upward or shrink back. It simply remained, as if it had always been there, waiting for Ferris to grow quiet enough to truly notice. He had not spoken in some time, and yet he had never felt more understood. The patterns in the wax had smoothed into concentric rings now, like ripples on water undisturbed. They pulsed gently with the warmth of the flame. No longer random, no longer shifting. They had become settled. Ferris stared at them with the gentle wonder of someone watching snowfall through thick glass. He did not try to interpret them. He only felt them. And above it all, within the stillness deeper than the cellar, older than stone, there was something new. A song. Not with melody, not with words, but a song nonetheless. It came not from outside, but from within the silence. A harmony of breath, dust, warmth, and memory, woven so tightly together that even the walls seemed to hum. Not loudly, but enough. He tilted his head slightly, listening without effort. His body did not ache anymore. His hands no longer trembled. Even his sorrow had grown. Gentle, I think, he murmured, more to the silence than to himself, like this house has stopped waiting. No reply came, but something in the candle shifted. It gave one soft lean to the left, then right, like a farewell. And in the puddle of wax, one last pattern bloomed, a simple spiral surrounded by 7 small dots. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt it, deep in his ribs beneath the echo of every winter he had lived through. It was the shape of release, of completion. He looked around the cellar one final time. Every object now seemed to rest more easily on its shelf. Every crack in the wall looked as though it had found its purpose. And when he closed his eyes, he did not imagine her standing nearby. He did not dream of the shimmer or the breath behind his ear. He simply felt held. Not by arms, but by presence. The song inside the silence continued, not as a crescendo, but as a slow, steady heartbeat, like time itself was falling asleep. And Ferris, keeper of the last candle, whispered, "It's all right now, you can go." But the flame, not yet. Part 16, the flame that waited for his last word. The cellar no longer felt like a room. It felt like the inside of a breath, everything held in suspended. The dust, the warmth, the quiet. Even the stone seemed to pause in its ancient patience. And at the heart of it all, the candle. Small, steady, unmoving. Ferris had not spoken for what felt like a day. Or a year. He didn't know. He didn't need to know. Time had let go of him, and in return, he had let go of everything else, except the flame. He still watched it, not with worry, but with wonder. It had stayed, long past what was natural, long past what was necessary, and in its glow he saw something unexpected. Not her, not shadows, but himself. Not as he was, but as he had been. Younger, stronger after he barely remembered. He saw his hands shaping the first perfect candle. He saw her wiping wax from his nose. He saw the day they danced, clumsy, laughing when the sun broke through the mist for the first time in a month. The candle showed him these things, not as visions, but as warmth, a warmth that wrapped around the bones gently, reminding them they had done enough. He shifted slightly, letting his back rest more fully against the stone. The floor no longer felt cold. It felt like earth. Real, kind, final. He reached out once more and rested a fingertip at the edge of the wax pool. It was not hot, not soft, just warm, like the memory of holding hands. His voice came out hoarse, barely a thread of sound. "Will you wait just a little longer?" He didn't know who he asked. Maybe the flame, maybe her, maybe himself. The candle did not answer. It didn't need to. Its flame dipped ever so slightly, not from fading, but from listening. And Ferris understood. The candle would stay, not because it had to, but because it chose to, until the last moment, until he was ready, not before. And so he leaned his head back, not to sleep, but to rest, as he had not rested in years. Part 17, when wax forgot to melt. Ferris did not dream, he simply drifted. The cellar had no edge anymore, no corners, no shadows, no weight. It was no longer beneath the house, it was beneath everything, deeper than sleep, quieter than silence. And yet, the candle remained. By all understanding, it should have gone out. The wick had long since burned down into the pool of wax. The wax itself had cooled, and yet remained fluid. No smoke, no flicker, just a single soft flame. As if the candle, too, was afraid to leave him alone. Ferris's breathing had slowed, not from effort, but from peace. Each inhale was soft, shallow. Each exhale, a little memory released. One breath carried the scent of rosemary from her apron. Another brought back the weight of her head on his shoulder during chapel prayers. Another, the feel of the first snowflake they had caught together on the back step, laughing like fools. The flame pulsed, not as if reacting, but echoing. Ferris felt it. He wasn't alone down here. He never had been. But now he understood it. Every night spent tending wax, every whisper into a dark room, every time he touched the cellar door and hesitated, she had been near, not haunting, not waiting, but keeping the promise they made when her last candle burned out. One light, always one. I'll stay until the last one fades. He'd thought she meant until his last candle faded, but now he wondered. Maybe she had been the candle all along, and the wax, the flame, the warmth, all her. Still here, still steady, because he hadn't been ready to leave. He opened his eyes once more. The cellar was unchanged, and yet it was everything now, more chapel than basement, more memory than stone, more sacred than solemn. He smiled. Not the smile of relief, not triumph, just recognition. The way one smiles at a familiar path after a long walk through fog. And the candle finally moved, its flame tilted forward, toward him. A bow, a goodbye, or a welcome. Ferris let out a long final breath, the kind you only give away when you're certain the rest of yourself is ready to follow. Part 18, the flame that waited to leave Ferris did not rise. There was no more need. His body had become part of the cellar, not in the way of stone or dust, but in stillness. A kind of stillness that only comes when everything that needed to be said has already been whispered. The candle sat beside him, unmoved, unfazed. Its flame, impossibly small now, hovered just above the pool of wax. No wick left, no fuel to burn, and yet it stayed, like breath held in the chest, like a word on the edge of being spoken. Outside, the village of Elder Hollow slumbered beneath its eternal mist. No one passed by his door. No one wondered where Ferris had gone, because in some strange, quiet way they all knew. He had always belonged to the shadows, to the warmth of wax and whisper, to the soft hum of memory. And now, at the end of it all, he had found his answer. The cellar had changed, not in structure, but in presence. The darkness no longer loomed, it cradled. And the silence no longer threatened, it welcomed. The candle's light dimmed further, just a breath away from vanishing. But it waited. Not for Ferris, he was already gone. Not in body, not yet, but in spirit. What remained was her. For just beyond the edge of vision, where the ripple of wax met stone, stood the shimmer once more. Clearer now, closer. A form in full, no longer veiled, no longer watching from the corners. She stood by his side, silent as always, but this time she reached out, and though the air did not shift and the candle did not flicker, the flame leaned ever so gently toward her outstretched hand. And in that moment, between blink and breath, between shadow and light, the cellar bloomed with a warmth that came from nowhere, from nothing, from everything. She had come to walk him home. And the candle, that last faithful witness, remained just a moment longer, because even flames need time to say goodbye. Part 19, when shadows walked upstairs. The cellar was quiet now, not the kind of quiet that listens, but the kind that remembers. Where Ferris had sat, there was no longer a weight, no longer breath, only the soft imprint of presence, a shape left in the stillness, a silence that had form, and beside it, the candle. Its flame was little more than a golden thread now, so thin it could barely be seen, but it hadn't gone, not yet, because something still lingered. Not regret, not fear, but footsteps, soft, measured, moving upward. She was walking again, not pacing across the roof, not pressing through the fog, but climbing the ladder. Not to haunt, not to stay, but to leave, through the house they had once built together, room by room. The old wooden beams above groaned once, not in protest, but like lungs releasing a final, deep breath. The chair beside the hearth creaked gently as though it had been sat in one last time. The curtains moved without wind. The doorframe exhaled a memory. She passed through them all, a shimmer, a touch, a farewell to every corner. And though no one saw it, no one would speak of it. The villagers felt it. A warmth at their windows, a quiet bell that rang without sound, a faint scent of beeswax and rosemary in the air. Some said it was just the weather changing. But others, the old ones, the ones who still lit their candles carefully, they paused. They knew. Down in the cellar, the candle gave one final flicker. Not weak, just finished. The wax beneath it was perfectly still. No smoke rose, no sound, no shift in air, just the smallest curl of gold fading into shadow, and then, not darkness, but rest. Part 20, the house that no longer waited. The cottage at the edge of Elder Hollow stood exactly where it always had. Its roof still leaned just slightly toward the east. Its shutters still trembled in the slightest breeze. Its chimney, though long cold, still reached upward, as if hoping to catch one final thread of smoke that would never rise again. But something had changed, not in the stone, not in the wood, but in the air. The waiting was gone. The house had been a vessel for longing, for memory, for one man's quiet vigil beside a single flame. Now it simply stood, still, settled, free. The villagers noticed. They didn't speak of it, of course, not directly, but they walked a little slower near the fence. Some removed their hats, others looked toward the upstairs window as if someone might still be watching from within. And though no one entered, no one forgot. They remembered the candle maker, the man who spoke little but always looked tired, the man who always smelled faintly of wax and thyme. They remembered that his chimney no longer smoked, that his door never reopened. But none of them dared ask why the cellar window glowed so long after his passing, because even after the last breath had left him, even after her steps had faded into silence, even after the flame had died, the light remained. Not a flame, not a ghost, but a presence. Like warmth held in stone, like the final note of a lullaby still humming through the walls. The house had become a place of sleep now, not the kind that ends at morning, but the kind that begins at peace. And below, where the wax had hardened around a wick long spent, there sat one final mark in the stone. A spiral, not carved, not drawn, formed by nothing, left by everything. And so ends the tale of the candle and the ghost. It was never a haunting, never a curse, only a promise. One flame, one memory, one final light before the rest.